Michelangelo's jealous rivalries with other artists didn't end with Pietro Torrigiano. They would flare repeatedly, giving evidence of a deep-seated insecurity that would haunt him and drive him throughout his life. During these years, Michelangelo's spirit and intellect had been decisively shaped by the humanistic values of the Renaissance. But he was also deeply influenced by the Christian beliefs that were prevalent at the time. These contrasting themes can be seen in the two most significant sculptural works of his early career. The Madonna of the Steps, depicting a tender religious scene, not only highlights the 16-year-old's exceptionally refined technique, but in its quiet serenity also suggests a deeply introspective side of his personality. The Battle of the Centaurs, with its writhing mythological figures, hints at the explosive emotions raging within the young artist. These two traits would later merge and give birth to some of the greatest masterpieces ever created. Barely 2 years after Michelangelo joined his household, Lorenzo the Magnificent died. Deeply shaken by the loss of his first great patron and benefactor, Michelangelo left the Medici Palace and returned to his father's modest house. His bleak mood didn't last long, however. The 17-year-old soon decided to master anatomy so he could perfect his renderings of the human form. The dissection of human corpses was strongly condemned by the church without special permission. But Michelangelo enlisted the aid of the prior of a local church which ran the hospital to gain access to the hospital's morgue. It was here that Michelangelo probed the secrets of the human body. Yet even as he was undertaking his anatomical studies, Michelangelo was becoming more aware of his religious faith. The impressionable young artist was greatly affected by the sermons of a fanatical monk named Savonarola.
The influence of Savonarola on Michelangelo was, I believe, very, very great. Michelangelo said at the end of his life that he could still remember the sound of Savonarola's voice. And I think also that some of Savonarola's ideas show up in the Sistine ceiling.
A throwback to the intolerant religious beliefs of the medieval world, Savonarola zealously rejected what he saw as the secular hedonism of the age, particularly in the city of Florence where he preached. For a time, the glorious days of the Florentine Renaissance appeared to be in jeopardy. But Savonarola's fanaticism went too far, and he was eventually excommunicated and burned at the stake. When the French king invaded Italy in 1494, adding to the turmoil in Florence, Michelangelo left the city. After a short stay in Bologna, Michelangelo ended up in Rome 2 years later, where he received a commission that allowed him to give form to his growing spiritual awareness. The Pietà, completed in 1500, depicts the Virgin Mary tenderly cradling the body of Christ. Ironically, the artist's anatomical studies, which to a religious zealot like Savonarola would have been considered a mortal sin, had an enormous impact on the statue. The slack figure of Christ is so remarkably realistic that observers of the day were stunned. Wrote one, "It would be impossible to find a body showing greater mastery of art, or a nude with more detail in the muscles, veins, and nerves, stretched over their framework of bones. It staggers belief that the hand of an artist could have executed this inspired and admirable work so perfectly." When Michelangelo learned that some were attributing his creation to another artist, he stole into the church where it was being displayed and carved his name on the statue, across the front of Mary's gown. It was a display of vanity that the proud young sculptor would never repeat again.
The Pietà proved once and for all that Michelangelo was a great genius, and the very commission, when the commission was actually undertaken, Michelangelo was it was said that he would make something better than anything past or present, and when it was unveiled, I think it was obvious that it was, and it made his reputation.
At the age of 25, Michelangelo was becoming famous, yet it was far from a happy period in his life. Burdened by the financial demands of his father, who constantly nagged him about money, Michelangelo lived like a pauper.
Michelangelo's father, Ludovico Buonarroti, was, I guess, best described as a great big nothing. Anyway, he didn't earn very much, and he wasn't particularly honest, and there was even one occasion on which Michelangelo accused him of stealing from him. Despite all of these things, however, Michelangelo respected his father very, very greatly, and he loved him tremendously.
Dearest Father, do not be surprised if occasionally I write you in an angry tone. At times I'm quite upset by things that befall one who is away from home. You must realize that I too spend money and have my own troubles. In spite of all this, I shall send you what you ask of me, even if I should have to sell myself as a slave.
Michelangelo's favorite brother by far was Buonarrota. We know this because once Buonarrota got sick and Michelangelo just about totally freaked out. He got very hysterical about the whole thing and wanted to spend huge amounts of money on the best doctors that could be found for Buonarrota.
Dear brother, the letter from you heartened me greatly. I think of you all the time, so be in good spirits and keep your nose to the grindstone as you have been doing. I want you to know that I gave 2 ducats to Balducci here in Rome so that he could have Francesco Strozzi give them to you in Florence. My best regards to all of you, and especially to my father Lodovico, whom I esteem as such. May God help you.
Despite his artistic success in Rome, the ever-restless Michelangelo soon returned to his home in Florence, where he received the greatest challenge of his early career. He was commissioned by the Florentine Office of Works to carve a statue out of a huge block of marble that had been badly damaged by an earlier artist 35 years before. Michelangelo had an almost mystical belief that the figures he carved already existed fully formed within the blocks of stone he worked. By studying the raw marble, examining its patterns of fissures and veins, he could sense where the figure slept. Then layer by layer, blow by blow, he would liberate his creation from its rocky prison. Isolating himself with the enormous piece of marble, Michelangelo chipped and hammered away, letting no one but his few assistants observe his progress. After 4 years of back-breaking labor, he finally unveiled his giant sculpture. Standing over 14 feet tall, the magnificent David was a towering achievement, both literally and figuratively. The expression of outward calm first seen in Michelangelo's early Madonna of the Steps was again evident in his rendering of this legendary biblical king. However, it had been charged with an inner dynamism that made the work electrifying.
It's the work which really summed up everything he had been learning about up to that point. It's, of course, a colossal male nude, and he'd been studying classical antiquity. He'd been doing some dissections to learn about the human body better. In addition, of course, the David stood for Florence and stood for his civic identity. It was a symbol of civic liberty, and it was something that Michelangelo deeply believed in.
From the moment the David was revealed, Michelangelo was hailed as one of the greatest sculptors who ever lived. But the Renaissance was an age of giants, and there was still an artist whose stature eclipsed even that of Michelangelo: Leonardo da Vinci.
The 2 personalities of Michelangelo and Leonardo are different, even though they were contemporaries, and they lived long lives, both of them. Michelangelo, first of all, was much more of a tormented man. I think Leonardo was more widespread in a way. His paintings are more... Happy is not the right word, but they were melancholic, but they were calm and quiet. And Leonardo was involved in so many other things that I almost feel that art to him became natural. For Michelangelo, art was suffering.